You're listening to Why We Do What We Do.
Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your Simon Says host, Abraham.
And I am your Simon Says host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about all the things that people do and science and psychology and skepticism. And sometimes we talk about the things that people do that then other people do those same things.
Yes. So today we're talking about imitation, which is arguably one of the most important generalizable skills that humans need. Like, we need this skill.
Yeah, it really is. And that is kind of the purpose of talking about this. This came up in a discussion we were having about how infants will imitate the faces and behaviors of the people around them. And there is a tendency to maybe want to look at the things that they do as part of their imitation, such as facial imitation, and read into it emotions. And we don't know if they're necessarily experiencing those emotions because those emotions can be very complex.
Right.
And it seems like most scientists and child psychologists think they're probably just imitating. And then I wanted to qualify just imitating by saying just imitating is actually really important and really good. And so Let's do a full episode on that.
Yes, so here we are.
Yes. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're so happy to have you. If you are returning to us from having listened to us previously, then welcome back. So happy to have you again.
Love return listeners.
Exactly. But if you like what you hear today, then you can support us by going over to our Patreon, joining the club of cool people. You can also pick up some merch, leave us a rating and review, like and subscribe. And go do what we do, and then just give us all the credit or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah, just repeat what we're saying, and just give us credit, but repeat what we're saying, and then the people will like us because they like you.
Yeah, it can be why we did what we did.
Why we do what they do.
Yeah, there you go. If you're joining us on the day that this releases, it is September 25th, and happy Banned Websites Awareness Day. Or happy?
Maybe?
I don't know.
It's Binge Day as well.
Yeah, it is Comic Book Day. Binge those comic books.
Love that so much. What an art form. Also an art form, it is Math Storytelling Day.
Oh, I love that. It is National Bakery Day.
Love bakeries. It is National Cooking Day as well.
Oh, those things complement one another. And related to that, it is National Food Service Employees Day. A lot of very restaurant-y themed day today.
Yeah, a lot of it. It is National Lobster Day, which is always impressive to me that somebody saw one of those things and said, let's eat that.
True. It is National One Hit Wonder Day.
So celebrate Oasis. Ooh, shots fired. Just kidding. They had 2 hits. It's National Psychotherapy Day.
It is National Research Administrators Day. Very important to psychotherapy. Well, maybe not psychotherapy. Very important to people who do a lot of research.
Oh, man, you just got rid of all of our Freudian listeners. Today is National Tune-Up Day. So if you have a piano, I guess, make sure that's good.
Tune your guitar.
Yeah, all of it.
It is World Ataxia Awareness Day. I was actually thinking we should talk about ataxia sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. We should. It's World Dream Day.
It is World Pharmacists Day.
Ooh. It's also World School Milk Day.
It is Banned Books Week, also known now as Florida Week, I guess.
Florida Week. Yay. DeSantis Week. It is Deaf Dog Awareness Week. Love those guys.
Cute. It is International Interpreters and Translators Week.
Even better if they're for dogs. It's Minimally Invasive Surgery Week.
It is National Dog Week. Yay.
It should be National Dog Forever. International Dog Forever. It's National Farm Animals Awareness Week.
It is Sea Otter Awareness Week.
So cute. It's Tolkien Week as well. So if you like Lord of the Rings.
Of course, very importantly, it is National Hispanic Heritage Week.
That's a typo on my end. It's actually the National Hispanic Heritage Weeks.
Oh, weeks. Good.
So,
okay, good.
Yeah. So we're well into that celebration. And it's also the Remember to Register to Vote Week.
Oh, so important.
Please. So important, especially coming up because things are a real mess right now.
All right. So hopefully you have a chance to celebrate any or all of those holidays as you see fit. But we're actually here to talk about other things. That is the importance of copying what other people do.
Yes. So, we're going to talk about kind of what this means and what it does for us on a day-to-day basis. But just a fair warning, we are going to say the word imitation like at least 1,000 times in this next hour. Easily. It's going to come up a lot. So.
Yeah, it's going to, I'm going to say it, then Shane's going to say it, then I'm going to say it again. And we're going to just keep doing that a lot throughout the entire discussion. But
yeah,
we are going to unpack what imitation is, sort of speak through the definition, why it is important and how it does or doesn't develop. And as we mentioned that this all sort of started in a previous episode, we were talking about that infants will imitate facial expressions to some extent.
Right.
And then we, as I said, we sort of said they're just imitating. And really that was just to say rather than them necessarily expressing those clear emotions, they were imitating other facial expressions that people make. Now that is also, of course, infants do make their own facial expressions with respect to their emotions. They're not that savvy, they're not just copying us. They do also have real emotions that they feel and that they manifest those things. But just to say that it may have sounded dismissive of imitation. And then I was actually thinking that it would be a fun thing to tackle because it probably sounds really straightforward. And in many ways it is. But I think there's some interesting aspects to it that most people don't necessarily consider. And so we wanted to just unpack what makes it important, how it works, or why, people think that it's important with respect to development.
So imitation is familiar enough that probably most people will likely recognize it. We know what it is. We know what it looks like. We know how we do it, and even have at least an idea, if not a fully formed idea of what it is or what we think it is. So you probably have, I would say, a general idea. That when somebody is imitating you or you are imitating somebody, what that means and what it is. But it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, very simply put, imitation is when one thing is like another thing, but is not that thing.
Sure.
That's sort of the simplest way to break down what imitation is. Imitation likely conjures an idea in a lot of people of kind of inauthenticness. So, for example, imitation crab is like crab, but is not actually made out of crab.
Right.
So it is sort of portrayed as crab, even though that's not what it is. Imitation meat is like meat, but is not made out of severed animal muscles. Although in some versions, imitation meat was still made out of animal viscera and other byproducts in historical versions of imitation meat.
Huh.
So it was not necessarily made out of muscles, but was still made out of animals.
Yeah.
But then maybe more contemporary imitation meat is made out of plants, but is intended to be like meat.
Right. So when we talk about imitation in behavior, though, it's doing it as another does, doing the same thing that somebody else does. It's mimicking, it's matching, it's copying some aspect of another person, including their behavior. And mostly when we talk about that inside of behaviorism, we are talking about the behavioral part of this.
Right. Let's go ahead and dig in then if we say it's copying what they do. But what does it mean? What does that mean to say that someone is copying or mimicking or matching someone else's behavior? Let's just sort of talk through an example of why it seems straightforward, but there are some considerations to start to ask or to investigate when trying to discuss if we're clear on what the definition is.
Right.
So let's say someone staples two pieces of paper together and someone else who's watching them then staples three pieces of paper together. Were they imitating?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right. So it's not exactly the same, but it is similar. And remember, imitation means like, not exactly, not exact facsimile of necessarily.
Right.
And we'll get to that. Well, okay, let's go back to this. What if they do staple the two pieces of paper together like the first person, but in the second instance, they use their feet to press the stapler down, assuming that the first person used their hands? Does the outcome matter or just the form?
That's also a good question.
The form of the first one was they did grab paper, staple. They just happened to grab one more paper. And the second one, the outcome was the same. You had two pieces of paper stapled together, but instead of using their hands, they used their feet. Again, assuming the first person used their hands. It's where is it imitation versus not?
Well, thank you for taking the time to make imitation more complicated than we thought it was. So
you're welcome. That's what
yeah,
I do.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Hey, welcome. Welcome to your first time listening to Why We Do What We Do. We take things and we make them more complicated than they need to be. No, but so one way to think about this is if you saw person A do a thing and then saw person B do a thing, and you could report that what person B did was similar enough as to be considered generally identical to person A, then person B was imitating person A. That is, what one person does is similar in form to what another person does. So going back to kind of that example, I would say stapling the 3 papers was probably similar. Stapling with your feet, not so much.
I think that most people would tend to agree with that for the most part. And so really what that means is that mostly imitation is topographically, which is to say formally or visually, similar in appearance, although imitation can be a broad category, and there is imitation that has no visual component. So a sibling whose younger sibling starts playing the same instrument as them might say that the younger sibling is just copying them, or maybe even say what imitating them, even though they might not be playing the same songs, because one person's sort of general pattern activity was picked up an instrument, and the other person's behavior was and also picked up the same instrument as a activity, as a hobby, maybe as a thing to learn. And you might call that imitation, even though nothing they do looks exactly like what the first one does. It's sort of thematically on point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that I could see that too. I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to play guitar, so I got a guitar because I wanted to copy Green Day. So I wanted to learn Green Day songs, and my instructor wanted to teach me blues songs, and I was mad that I was not allowed to play Green Day songs. So I was like, I hate this. I don't like it. I don't want to play it. And I stopped playing guitar. So I stopped imitating Green Day because I could not imitate Green Day. I was not allowed to.
It was actually funny is that some of the earliest songs I learned to play on drums were also Green Day songs.
You know, Trey Cool is a great drummer. People don't realize how technical he really is when you really listen to him. He's actually really good.
He's very consistent too. He can.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So that was our sidebar on Green Day. But we were talking about imitation, and as I mentioned here in this example of where one sibling starts playing trombone and then their younger sibling is like, oh, I'm going to play trombone too. You might describe what they're doing as imitating the first person's behavior. And again, it doesn't necessarily need to be the exact same things inside of that pattern if the pattern in general is the same. And neither does the imitation need to be perfectly exact. For example, when I was a very young child, I have the story my mom loves to tell of we were at a cabin. My uncle was out chopping wood. I went out with a stick and I started whacking nearby logs. And I was sort of imitating his chopping behavior, but they were not going to give little 4-year-old Abraham an axe, understandably. I have no memory of this, but I think that probably I had no intention of actually trying to chop. I was going through the motions of what he was doing.
Sure.
And so very different outcome, arguably very different form, but sort of similar enough that it was like what he was doing. So it was imitation.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, maybe one way to think about this is, and we'll keep unpacking this, but one way to think of it is the behavior looks the same, but it doesn't necessarily rely on the outcome to be the same. So in that scenario, you were imitating, but you didn't produce the same outcome, even though it looked similar. And eventually you might transfer that skill into, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. You'll transfer that skill into a real life situation, but you didn't have to imitate.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. It was a step in the development of a skill that, or an overall repertoire, skill set that is necessary for me to have, unlike how it is unnecessary to have ads. Okay, we're back. So there is sort of a more scientifically, if you will, technical way of unpacking then how we would talk about imitation that relates both to its sort of function and form, which is that when our behavior comes under the influence of the correspondence between our actions and another's actions, essentially.
Sure.
That is, the more closely we perceive our behavior to match another person's, the more successful we feel. That's essentially what imitation is. We are approximating in some version what someone else's behavior is like, And then we are essentially matching it to the best of our ability. And as close as we feel we have gotten, then we're sort of like, yes, I have successfully imitated this thing. Now, again, it's really not that explicit. Like almost none of us will imitate someone else and then go, yes, I have successfully imitated this thing. That's not really the thought that happens.
Right,
but
right.
Just the feeling of essentially the idea is try to make our behavior like that behavior. And as we perceive that being like that behavior, then that's just essentially what the goal was, right? And so we're like, oh, sweet, like I'm copying this thing to copy it and then move on to whatever the next thing I'm going to do is.
Right. So the question you have to ask, I think as part of this, because we are talking about outcomes of this too, is how do you know you've imitated correctly? So often we can see that our limbs move and we might be able to glean that the perspectives we have of our limbs are similar to that of our model, the model being the person that we're imitating. But what about facial expressions? How can we tell, particularly as we are just developing the muscles to make these movements, whether our face looks like someone else's? This implies the broader question, how do we come to imitate? How do we get to that space of imitating?
Yes. Is this something that we are just biologically prepared to do and we just imitate? Not necessarily. We obviously have the capacity to do it, so there is an aspect of our biology that facilitates it, but it is going to develop along a specific sort of trajectory. Now, that being said, imitation is likely an evolutionarily developed tendency, and it is advantageous for our species to be able to do as other members of our species does. And actually, several species have versions of this where they can imitate one another, and that is part of their learning, is watching what another one of their species does and then trying it themselves. And so there's a lot of advantages to having this be at least having the capacity to learn how to do this.
Right, absolutely. So humans have births on the more extreme altricial end of the spectrum of altricial to precocial offspring, and we are especially cooperative. Further, it is much more efficient to learn from observation rather than trial and error, particularly when you have the pathetic biological defenses and weapons that we do. We are soft marshmallow people that are very easily eaten and destroyed in nature. So we have to have other defenses, and this is maybe one of the things. And like being able to learn rapidly from observing things is actually one of our greatest traits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are slow, squishy, and do not have sharp parts and have very small forward-facing mouths. The only way we are going to survive is if we can learn very, very fast. And we do, and it has been to our great advantage and disadvantage in many ways.
Yes.
But we appreciate it.
Abraham, I have a question for you, though.
Yes.
What is altricial?
Ooh.
That's the first time I have ever in my life heard that word.
Great question. Yeah. So altricial has to do, it was kind of, you can get a little bit the definition, understanding what precocial means. But altricial means that refers to how animals are born and how helpless they are.
Yeah.
So on the particularly altricial end of the spectrum, babies that are very, very helpless, and humans are pretty far on that spectrum.
Yeah.
We pretty much have to completely care for and spend all of our time caring for infants right as they're born.
Yes.
But some species, many fish, giraffes, there are many birds, there are species that are born and they essentially can start taking care of themselves almost immediately.
Like sharks, snakes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly right. And so they're born, and those are called precocial, meaning that they're born basically very early. They are ready to start learning from their environment, and they can start fending for themselves. So humans are an altricial species because we are born very, very helpless and require a lot of dependence from our parents. And like many species are across the spectrum there. Some are just as altricial as ours. Some of them are like born completely independent and ready to go.
Yeah.
Part of the social aspect of how we have evolved as a species likely comes from the fact that we have to care for our young.
So the word precocious comes from precocial, obviously, like that. It's in that world. So if you've met a precocious child, then you're basically saying like this person is like one of those kids. It's like an old for their age type of situation. Yes. You know, very mature for your age. They're precocious. That's a way to say that.
Yeah.
But I feel like altricial is a really good insult that you can throw at people that wouldn't know what it meant.
There you
That's
go.
so altricial of you.
We're spawning new ways to criticize people. Love it.
Yeah, I think that'll be really fun. So if you have like an enemy of yours, you can throw that out there. And like, first of all, you're going to make them go, what does that? And they're going to be like really twisted about that. And then also they're going to go look it up and they're going to go, oh, damn it, Shane.
If you walk
Curses.
walk away from this episode with nothing else, it is that you should start calling people altricial.
Yes. So you're welcome
As
for
an
that.
insult.
So
Yes.
yeah, as an insult, yes. So here's the thing though. How all this developed that we're talking about, this idea of imitation, right? How it all developed, not entirely understood. So Piaget noted that that imitation is a foundational skill that begins to develop within the first year and by 8 to 12 months for most infants. Most infants, by the time they're 1, can imitate and imitate quite a few things.
Yeah, there were some early studies that suggested that, and their data seemed to indicate that even newborn infants would begin imitating within hours of birth. However, later and more better designed studies were unable to replicate that finding. It does seem more universal that imitation develops a little bit later, like sort of at that 8 to 12 months range, and is not really prepackaged out of the womb. One thing that many people know and many people will not know is that babies are born with extraordinarily poor eyesight that gets better fairly rapidly, but everything is just a blurry haze to them initially. So the ability to imitate would be hampered to some extent by what they would be able to see. And of course, babies who are born with visual impairments altogether, they'll probably not pick up motor imitation directly by observation.
Right. And so, as with all development, time is likely a minor, if not almost irrelevant factor. I think a lot of times people think development is based on time. What time ultimately is time is just exposure to more learning opportunities.
Yeah, typically.
So that's really what happens inside of that, right? So like the reason people gain skills over time is because they have had a period where they have been exposed to learning opportunities. That's really it. So if time were the only factor, we could stick a child in a box and never interact with them, only feeding them through a tube for 8 months, and once they're released, they would be imitating. And this is unlikely to happen, and even less likely that someone would conduct that experiment, thank the Lord. But like it's one of those things where at the end of the day, everybody thinks like just people happen to learn because they get older.
Right.
They learn because over time, they've been exposed to more information.
Yeah.
Or more learning opportunities.
Right. With time comes, as you mentioned, opportunities to practice. And if those opportunities don't present themselves, then they won't have an opportunity to learn.
Right.
You could cram more opportunities or fewer into that amount of time, and that will influence how much they learn in that amount of time.
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. Okay, so yeah, we don't really need to do that experiment of locking a child in a box to see if they pop out being able to imitate. We wouldn't, but we also don't need to. Research has shown that children start imitating sooner and more robustly if there is one specific factor in place, and that is
humans.
If someone else is, yes, humans. If someone else is imitating them first. I thought this was really interesting when I was learning about this. Because the imitation dynamic is one in which caregivers of a child will imitate the child's sounds, their movements, their facial expressions. And it actually makes a lot of sense then, because then we start to think that as the child's behavior is affecting those around them, they have the child is like, they do something and then someone else does something exactly like what they just did, right? So they're learning, like, I can make that giant puppet over there do what I want. That they start to influence behavior of others relatively consistently, then they will also start to develop the sort of social cohesion aspect of this, that so if I do X, they do X.
Right.
And so if they do X, I do X too.
Right.
It's like I would go blah 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 blah, and then the person that goes blah 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 blah, and then when unprompted they just do it to me. They go blah 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 blah, and I'm like, I know that one. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so and so I just copy what they did, and so the bidirectional relationship begins to exist. So it does make a lot of sense, I think, philosophically, to think that first they learn that they can influence their environment. And then they can then respond to that environment in a way that is predictably corresponded to how they've learned to influence it already.
Right. Absolutely. So further, studies have found that the person actually doesn't matter, not as much as we originally thought. That is, the infant is likely to imitate a stranger, as likely to imitate a stranger, I should say, as they are to imitate their parents. Although, I'd imagine this is at least partially influenced by how many people the child will regularly interact with. They'll contact so many people, especially early, especially if there's a lot of family around. There's so many faces and so many different faces, right? But again, we're not going to do that study. That's really hard to do that study, and we really shouldn't be exposing babies to strangers all the time.
Yeah.
We don't really need to do that.
Well, or the reverse of that, which is like, let's not expose them to any different people and then see if they still learn to imitate. Yeah. No, we don't need to.
It's not going to be helpful to get the answer to the question that we can kind of already interpret.
Yeah,
we can do an interpretive analysis of that.
Yes. Yeah. The ends do not justify the means.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast does not justify the ads.
Oh, boo.
Okay, we're back.
Hey.
So fast. Back
so
immediately.
Quick.
Yes. In talking here about essentially how we would learn about these things from imitation or learn about imitation, as you said, like we don't need to do the study where we specifically change those variables. What we can do is we can observe what already happens and we can start to interpret from that, but also like fit it inside the philosophical conceptual narrative that would make sense to help to unpack and make sense of the observations that we're able to make without necessarily making that direct manipulation to someone's life and circumstance.
Right.
But again, if we think about the fact that imitation is one of the earliest things that we do, that it is part of an important dynamic process by which an infant learns that they can change their environment and then they can respond to those same changes in their environment. Imitation is a skill that can sort of broadly be categorized as a behavioral cusp.
Oh.
And that's something that we'll likely need to unpack in a full-length treatment as a discussion in the future. But let's talk about a behavioral cusp.
Yeah, so briefly, and this is going to be funny because I was just in Hawaii, and I did do my supervision talk, and I did comment about how I had no idea what these were because I can never get them straight between behavioral cusp and pivotal behavior, and I just always am like, so I'm thankful for this note from you that I can read, because I would have been, if you'd have told me what a behavioral cusp is, I'd have been like, it's a concept. So
it is a concept.
It is a concept. So briefly, a behavioral cusp means that once we learn to imitate, we can start doing a much broader range of skills. Once a baby can stand, the range of new things they can do expands immediately. They can walk, they can run, they can juke, they can jive, they can dance, they can do all those things from their feet.
Indeed. So, yeah, and I mean, behavioral cusp does not have to be imitation exactly, but the important thing here is just recognizing that what we mean when we talk about something being a behavioral cusp is that the development of that repertoire means there is a pretty large range of new possible skills and reinforcers that one can learn and then access in that order. Like I said, we'll unpack that more broadly in a subsequent discussion that I definitely look forward to having.
Yeah.
But for now, just understanding that it just means like when you can learn to imitate and you can kind of imitate anything generally, you can start to do a lot of things that you couldn't do before.
Right. Exactly. So when it comes to imitation in language, which I really love, babies can start to imitate some of the language sounds that they're exposed to very, very early. And I love this too, because I actually have a story about this. So when my daughter was little, my ex-wife was insistent on making sure that the first word that she said was mom.
Okay.
Or like mama.
Sure.
Right? So she was in my daughter's face was going, mama, say mama, mama, and like always doing that and exposing her to that. And of course her first word was dada. And that, the petty side of me felt pretty good about that. The scientist side of that understood that like the sound dada is easier to say than mama. So like I also realized that it wasn't personal, but it felt personal, and that felt pretty good. So when it comes to language in general though, the sounds part can be easy in the sense that there's often clear, immediate feedback that does not require perspective to tell if our sounds match other sounds. It is difficult in the sense that controlling those sounds and the order in which they go and relating them meaningfully to the world is enormously complex, because language is enormously complex, and it does require a boatload of cognitive development. So language and verbalization and all that, verbal behavior is far more complex than just going, oh, here's an antecedent, here's a behavior, here's a consequence, right? It does require a lot more piecing the world together, a lot more environmental circumstances, a lot more things going on.
Well, and it's shaping, right? So you can imagine if you're able to more or less imitate the sounds you hear, but you don't know what they mean, or even that they mean anything, you would essentially be babbling, right?
Right.
That is, in fact, exactly what babies do. If you right now tried to imitate another language that you knew the general sounds of, but you didn't know the language, you would more or less sound like a baby, albeit one with a very deep voice, babbling in that language.
Yeah. And also maybe offensive.
Yeah. And also using the cadence of the language that you do already speak. So like, let's say, Shane, how much French do you know?
I know none. Like functionally none. I know oui. I know bonjour.
Yeah.
I used to know pineapple, but I don't remember that anymore either.
All right, let's just say that you were maybe not pretend to be a baby, but let's just say you were trying to just say a bunch of French words without knowing a bunch of those French words. Just make the sounds of, but yeah, go for it.
Okay. Voulez vous coucher à la fois ce soir?
So
that's what I would assume.
There were some actual words in there. What you mostly said was nonsense, but you were close to asking me to go to bed with you.
Listen, Moulin Rouge has been stuck in my head for the last 3 months, so
yeah, if you're just saying, like, I think someone might go like and like they're sort of, it sounds like they're babbling and they're sort of trying to imitate some of the affects and sounds that are in there. But again, that's essentially what babies are doing. Like right now, the sequence of those sounds don't really matter to them. They don't have any meaningful association with anything. It's just sort of making the sound. So they babble, and that makes a lot of sense.
I do know ménage à trois too. So like I said, functionally useless in French. Functionally useless. I know not enough.
Great.
Okay. So it is unlikely that language develops sooner than motor movement, or motor imitation, I should say. So like language is more complex, but maybe hand movements and kind of doing that kind of stuff might be a little bit easier. So motor movements, particularly gross motor movements, are often functional because you've got babies that can like bring cups to their mouths or like feed themselves, bring food to their mouths, and they don't need to carry any broader cognitive meaning. They work for that baby, that work for that infant, period. So establishing a rich history of imitation with motor movements may actually support the development of language imitation, assuming the child begins to develop a generalized imitation repertoire, or they can generally imitate you. They can just copy stuff no matter what it is. Like it could be something completely arbitrary, like wave your hand, touch your nose, put your hands over your head, grab your ears. Yep. It could be all of those things. If they can copy multiple behaviors like that and they have like a good generalized skill, they're going to pick up some other things pretty quickly.
Yeah. Vocal imitation also, though, has the added burden that it often requires a complex set of lip, tongue, mouth, and air pressure modulation, so movements of the lips, tongue, and mouth, and that air pressure modulation to produce any given sound, let alone a rapid series of sounds that form a word. Like if you try and unpack even a single word, there's often many different types of sounds in there, and it requires that you are pushing air through in a steady stream and manipulating your vocal cords, manipulating your tongue, your mouth, your teeth often. And a child cannot easily observe how those sounds are produced. So it takes a lot of trial and error and attempting various mouth, tongue, lip, vocal cord manipulations before they start sounding like the sounds that they're trying to make.
Right.
And it's like, it's all new to them. So it's just a matter of like, they just got to work through it. They just got to try. Like, what if I do this? What if I do this? What if I do this? And eventually the circumstances will be such that it will start to match what they hear out in the world. And then they can replicate whatever like lip, mouth, tongue, vocal cord arrangement it took to make that imitation, and then could start to develop. But you can see why that would be so much harder. With those motor movements, they can just kind of do it. They can see like, well, you put your arm up, I put my arm up, look, they look the same.
Yeah.
But with vocal imitation, they can't even see how you're making the sound. They just got to mess around with making sounds until they figure out how to do it.
And also, too, vocal imitation and vocal language gets a lot of feedback, like a lot of feedback as time goes on, right? So like if they don't get the sound right away, you'll hear, I mean, if you spend any time around a parent with a toddler, and the toddler is learning language, or like the language is kind of early stages, and they say something kind of incorrect, like they say the word, you get the gist of it, but it's like kind of incorrect, you'll hear a parent correct and like have the child like maybe try to correct the word or try again or something like that. But like when my daughter was younger, she used to say blanklet, and she used to say
cute,
which is so cute. And then she would also say calipater. And so like, you know, my wife and I talked about this. We were like, well, we're not going to change that because that's adorable.
Yeah.
But we should probably work on changing it just in case, right? Because like you're going to hear that a lot. You're going to hear toddlers like get close, but not quite. And then you'll hear parents like do minor corrections when that word comes up.
I sort of have a vague memory of my younger siblings trying to learn refrigerator and always saying like flagellator.
Uh-huh. Yep. My brother still says woof. Like the pack of woofs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, my brother's a dog. So to support vocal imitation and vocal development, it's generally recommended to talk to infants like a lot, like all the time. I've seen some studies, or I've seen some maybe opinions, I should say. I've seen some opinions that say like, oh, you shouldn't really talk to babies like they're babies. Like you shouldn't do baby talk. You should just kind of talk. I've seen both of those, like kind of like, you know, babbling is fine to get them to kind of copy your sounds, but like you should really talk to them like, you know, and use like kind of your language and stuff. But it's also important to imitate them too. So like babbling and copying sounds they're making is fine, like we mentioned before. So babble at them, talk to them, engage them constantly, build off of what they're doing. No one is in control. Let the relationship happen. And if you're not sure what to do what they do. And when you think of something to do, then do it. It's fine. You should be good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really just like, just be there with them. Just be there with them. Sometimes you'll be copying them. Sometimes they'll be copying you. You can just sort of babble at them. Sometimes you can just talk to them, all the good things. So, you know, just keep them engaged, keep the vocalizations and the social interaction happening. And that builds up the importance of the social dynamic and that social relationship.
Right.
And that's sort of the general recommended strategy.
Right. Absolutely.
Alternatively, it is recommended that we play ads, and we do so begrudgingly. Okay, the last part to talk about here with imitation is imitation as it relates to disability, which is something that I think we just need to bring into our conversations more often, just generally, is how our topics relate to disability. But this is one that it definitely stood out to me and how there's a lot of importance to unpack here.
Yes. So it is always worth pointing out that imitation will be different for children with disabilities or various impairments, right? So children with hearing impairments will not be able to imitate vocalizations as readily or as similarly. And that's not true for all children, but like there are a lot of folks with hearing impairments might have a harder time with that, depending on the severity of the impairment, without additional support such as hearing aids. Because I mean, you might have a conversation with somebody who is hearing impaired or completely deaf, and you'll notice that they have vocal language because they've learned it, but you might notice that some of the enunciations are different and stuff like that because of the hearing impairment that might make it difficult to do the vocal imitation.
Yeah, exactly. Like deafness does not actually mean you cannot hear anything.
Right.
There is something that is making it so that it is impaired in some way or another. But there are children who are born with complete deafness. Like they'll never ever hear sound. And so for them, like it'll be difficult to match vocal language to anything in their environment because they wouldn't be able to receive the feedback to how well it matched. That's not to say that they won't make vocalizations. They probably will because it's very easy for us to do. As a species, we just basically breathe through our mouth with a little bit of vocal cord manipulations, and we do that naturally as part of crying anyway.
Right.
Anyway, that's a consideration. Another one here, and I mentioned this earlier, but that's that children with visual impairments might struggle with motor imitation without specific interventions or supports, because again, if they're matching their behavior to someone else's, that means that they must visually discriminate someone else's behavior such that they can tell that what they're doing matches what the model is doing, what the person that they're imitating is doing.
Right.
And if they have impairments with their ability to discriminate visual cues, then it would be extremely difficult for them potentially to tell that those things match.
Right.
There's, again, not to say that it's impossible, and you can do it by feel as well. If a child has very low visual acuity, but someone can sort of help them sort of feel like this is the position my hand is in, the position my arm is in, and then help the kid imitate that themselves, then they'll still have an opportunity to learn it. And of course, just because they have a visual impairment doesn't mean that they'll have necessarily other impairments. So they might still be able to pick up imitation in other ways. It's just going to be difficult with some motor imitation movements.
Right, absolutely. Children born with limb differences or appendage malformations may be unable to exactly imitate all of the behaviors as people that do not have a limb difference. So if somebody has they may have like structural, like skeletal muscular structural differences, right? Like they may not be able to lift their hand up over their head because of a shoulder issue or something along those lines. There's a lot of different things that can happen that might result in making those imitations more difficult or physically impossible.
Exactly right. Yeah, they could just be that they can't exactly replicate that. That's okay. Like they'll learn it another way, but it just might look a little different for them.
Right.
Now, another consideration here is that, as we've talked about, imitation is a social behavior, and it is arguably one of the most foundational aspects of social reciprocity. And one of the most characteristic features of an autism diagnosis is a general lack of social engagement. It is not going to be the case for every single one of them. As we have said many times and will continue to say, if you have met one child with autism, then you've met one child with autism.
Right.
Like everybody is different. But it is a common characteristic feature that there is sometimes a lack of social engagement, lack of social reciprocity. And that what can happen then is that imitation is one of the earliest priorities in therapies designed to support individuals with autism, because they might not necessarily be particularly keen to imitate if a lot of social things are not very present and sort of in their orbit, in their purview. So people who are working to support those individuals might specifically do a lot of imitation as part of their support structure to facilitate their ability to learn and develop.
Right. Let's go ahead and go into a study. Fair warning, this is a very, very, very poorly designed study, but it is a study that was done in this. Even with direct teaching, I'm just kidding. This is a great study. Even with direct teaching, some children still struggle to correctly imitate gross or fine motor movements, with especially children with autism. So for students with whom traditional strategies fail to adequately build imitation, some studies have successfully taught modeling by positioning the child in front of a mirror with the model next to them that can help them to see the correspondence between their motor movements and the models, or they're watching themselves model the behavior next to the model as well. Yeah, that was from Miller et al., 2015.
Shane's giving me a hard time because this is the first study that I published. So I'll do a little bit of unpacking here. The general idea here was that there were some students that I worked with who they just really struggled to develop certain motor movements, particularly one where it was the movement was not exactly in front of their face. And so it was difficult for them to match their movement to the model because they couldn't see the visual feedback of how well it corresponded to the model's movement.
Right.
Essentially, I found another study that had already done something with using a mirror similar to this, but it was pretty straightforward. I was basically just said, let's just put them in front of a mirror so that we can give them an opportunity to see how well what they're doing matches what I'm doing.
Right.
And it was very successful. We were able to get all of the skills that we were trying to teach acquired, and then even started to see some generalization to new skills as well that were related. And so I thought it went pretty well. And Shane was giving me a hard time, and that's fine.
Yeah. It's a very good study. It's great. It worked, and that's really what matters, right?
Yeah.
So if we can help provide support to be able to develop imitation, that can further facilitate acquisition skills or the acquisition of other tasks, such that the individual with disabilities, the person who is struggling with these skills, they will have an opportunity for greater independence and self-advocacy. So the thing is people don't realize how critically important imitation is to learning new skills.
Yeah.
If you've ever learned how to do a skill by watching a YouTube video, that is an example of you using your imitation repertoire, to your generalized imitation repertoire, to pick up a skill, having never done the skill, and then watching it, copying it, and contacting natural reinforcement inside of your own environment. Like, that matters. The amount of skills that we have probably learned through imitation is kind of absurd when you really think about it.
It's a whole lot. I mean, you're exactly right. Like, we do this all the time when we watch something and then to learn how to do it, and then we just try and copy what they're doing. And it seems to us pretty straightforward. Like, yeah, I'm just going to do that thing. But I cannot even tell you how many other species struggle with observational learning, where they pick up little, if anything, from some of their environment. Now, as I said, a lot of species do use observational learning.
Orcas do.
Yeah. But there are many that use it to a very tiny degree, oftentimes, if even noticeably at all.
Right.
And so the fact that we do it so readily, so easily, and that we can pick up whole new sets of skills without ever having done them first, or like learning just through trial and error, we can actually get pretty good at something right off the bat just by watching someone else who's already good at it do it, assuming it doesn't, require a whole lot of like specific fine motor muscle development,
right?
Which can be the case. Like, I don't know how good I would actually be at like, even if I watch someone play a very difficult guitar lick, like I am not used to coordinating my fingers in those ways.
Right.
And so even watching someone who's very, very good at guitar, I would not be able to replicate that because my fingers are just not that coordinated yet.
Right.
But
not
other
that
things
nimble.
like I'm not that nimble. I would have to really practice to get there. But anyway, long story short, it is something that we do very readily as a species, and it's kind of amazing, and it's very important. And one of the reasons that we can learn so efficiently and so effectively is that we can do that thing.
Right. It's pretty incredible. So imitation, don't sleep on it.
Imitation, good.
Imitation, good.
Why we do what we do, approved.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. We should get a rubber stamp for that, and go, boom, approved.
That's right. All right. I think that is mostly what we have to say about imitation, though. It's cool stuff. If you would like to tell us your thoughts about imitation or share your stories of your kids doing cute imitative things, we love to hear those. You should reach out to us. You can reach us on social media. You can email us directly at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com, and we would love to hear from you about all those things. Now, I need to read some credits, and then we're going to share some things with you that we think that you should check out if you're interested, and we call them our recommendations. But I would like to first say that, again, if you are joining us for the first time, thank you so much for being here. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Consider giving us a like and a subscribe and a rating and a review. At the very least, you can go click those 5 stars. It just helps everybody. It's really great. But if you subscribe, we'll also make sure that we show up every week in your podcast feed. Monday, we release mini episodes that are sort of bite-sized 10 to 15 minute dives on a single topic. Wednesdays, we release our full-length episodes where we really unpack something in high academic format. And you can make sure that those things always show up, and then listen to every one of them, or just whichever ones really stand out to you as seeming interesting. Whatever, we do our best.
Yeah.
But if you would like to even take that a step further, you can go over, pick up some merch at our store. And as I said, you can join us on Patreon. When you're there, you're going to get access to all kinds of cool behind the scenes content, ad-free content, early episodes, all that sort of thing. And we would so appreciate people who have already taken that leap. So I'd like to say a big, giant, congratulatory thank you to the people who helped make this podcast be a podcast. That is Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. Thank you all so much for your continued support.
Yes, we love you so much.
Of course, my team of people help make this happen. Writing and fact-checking from Shane and myself. Our audio engineering person who does all of the magic behind the scenes, who sometimes we make work far too hard, is Justin.
Sorry, Justin.
Yes. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. Is there anything else that I forgot? Anything you'd like to add before we recommend some things, Shane?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Well, first ads, then recommendations.
Oh. Recommendations.
I'm going to go first because I think your recommendation is really fun, and mine is really fun, but maybe has a smaller audience.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I am recommending a board game. This game is called Sagrada Artisans. Now, this is a legacy game, and a legacy game is one that is intended to be played once. And the reason that it goes like this is that as you go through playing the game, The game will add new rules. It will have you open secret envelopes with different components to the game that you will
Sure.
like sort of earn as it develops over the campaign. And it will permanently change and alter aspects of the game itself so that like you can't really go back. It could involve things like destroying cards. It could be putting stickers over the pieces that change what they do, and adding new cards. There's all kinds of things that change the rules of the game as you develop. And it usually is designed to take several weeks to play through. If you meet like once a week to do a board game night or something, it'll take you several weeks to play through that entire game. So you get a lot of play time out of the game. I've been afraid of these games because I really like replayability. I want to be able to sit down with a game, play it through, then play through again, and keep enjoying the playthroughs, and it doesn't like get stale or old, or I just memorize all the cards or anything. So it's like not that interesting.
Right.
And so a game that's specifically designed to be played only once is sort of like, not sure that that's for me. And then I played this game. Now, Sagrada Artisans is based off of another board game, a dice game actually, called Sagrada that I really, really, really like. And so I thought this would be a cool opportunity for me to sort of get into the world of legacy games. And I have really enjoyed it. It is really cool.
Yeah.
So now I'm more keen to pick up more legacy games. Sagrada Artisans, what I think they do really smart too, is the game starts very, very simple, and it starts to layer in aspects of complexity. So if someone had never played Sagrada or is not really in the board gaming world, you could pick this up, and I think you'd be able to follow it quite easily, as it starts with just like the very simple base set of rules, and then they start adding in some complexity to the rules over the course of multiple games.
Okay.
I think this works well for sort of newer people, but I really, really enjoy it. Strong recommend. It's called Sagrada Artisans.
Okay, cool. I like that. I think there's something really fascinating about the creativity inside the board game world, and like the amount of like rules that you have to create to make it work and not break a game. I think is really impressive. Like I can't think like that, so it's always very impressive to me.
Oh, and I forgot to say, the theme of this basically is the idea that you're building stained glass windows. So in the original Sagrada, you have these translucent colored dice that you're arranging in patterns on like a little grid, and you're trying to score various point conditions for that and follow specific placement rules.
Yeah.
In this game, you're actually using colored pencils to color in a sheet to make these like little stained glass window things.
Okay,
and again,
cool.
You're scoring points for the arrangements that you make according to some scoring conditions. So
okay, cool. I like that.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for Sagrada.
So my recommendation is a movie that recently came out called Beetlejuice.
Woo! I was going to recommend this if you didn't, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah, so first of all, I think I am just somebody who has a very low bar of entry for like entertainment. Like I'm just somebody who like I want to preface that because
movies.
You might be going,
I don't know about music.
Yeah, movies. Music, I'm very particular. No, I listen to a lot of music, but like I'm also like, oh, that sounds cool. But like, yeah, I'm very picky about my music too. So anyway, when it comes to movies, TV shows, and stuff like that, mostly movies, I just go to be entertained. I'm somebody who is just like happy to be there. I just want to have fun. Beetlejuice is absolutely that. It is fun. I think it's actually pretty good too. Like I'm not saying like it's a bad movie.
Yeah, I would say I think you're underselling the movie.
yeah. It's actually very good. So you've got the original cast: Catherine O'Hara, Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder. All three of them are amazing in it. Like it's so great. It takes place many years after the original Beetlejuice.
Yeah, basically like from when the first one came out to modern times.
Yeah. Winona Ryder has a child with, and like the child is Jenna Ortega. So good in it. Like definitely captures like the gothy angst, like anger that like Lydia Dietz had in the first one. Like it totally like it layers over, but like it's more modern. It feels good. But man, it is so much fun. It spends more time in the afterlife. There's a little bit more in that world, which is really cool. You've got Justin Theroux, who is so funny in it. He plays like he's ridiculous. He's Lydia Dietz's manager, and he's like a very like new agey, like kind of weird hippie culty acting guy.
Yeah.
Monica Bellucci in it is really great in it. She's like she's a character that's like, I don't want to reveal the story, but like she's a good character in it. Willem Dafoe is a guy that named Wolf Jackson. You gotta keep it real.
Super fun.
Oh my god, his character is so funny. My favorite gag is every time he shows up on screen, somebody walks off the side of the screen to hand him a cup of coffee. Like it happens every time he shows up on screen. It's great.
Yeah, even if it like makes no sense for the scene.
Yeah,
and even one of them, I think he takes it and just throws it.
He does. He crushes it in his hand and throws it. Yeah. It's done really well. It feels good. It does a lot of really cool callbacks, tiebacks. I think my favorite thing is how they wrote off the dad, though. That is one of my favorite things ever.
That was really good.
Yeah. So I learned that whole sequence that they do is, I guess, Tim Burton's like actual fear. Like he fears
I heard about this.
Death. Yeah, that death is how he would fear dying. So anyway, it's great. Danny DeVito's in it, which was a great surprise.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So please go see it, enjoy it, have fun with it. Take it for what it is, which is a Beetlejuice movie in all of its absurdity.
Yeah, well, and I think honestly they did some things really well. They didn't just try to copy the original movie. They didn't go off on some weird like, oh, what if we put Beetlejuice in this funny scenario? Ha ha ha. Right. I think they actually tried to introduce a new story using those characters in a way that felt like there were some homages to the first movie, but also like this is a totally unique standalone story.
Yes.
And it's very funny, it's very quirky, it's very weird. I think it was well written and well thought out, and it has some really, really good jokes in it that just really, really got me. And I think I say, when you say like, I love movies, but I have a low bar. I'm like, I actually think it's good. Like it's legitimately, you do not have to have a low bar to enjoy Beetlejuice.
Yeah, you just have to enjoy that world.
Yeah. Maybe for like Kong X Godzilla or Godzilla X Kong, you need a low bar.
Sure,
but
you need a low bar for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the house veil, I died when the death shroud on the house. Dude, when I saw that, I went, oh my God, that's amazing.
The house is in mourning.
It's so good.
So I second that recommendation. Very good. Okay, we spent about a quarter of this episode on recommendations, which honestly, like, that's why you're here. Like, let's be real.
That's why you're here. We know.
So Sagrada Artisans board game and Beetlejuice, the new movie. But as I said, if you'd like to talk to us about Imitation, or you can talk to us about those two things, you should reach out to us. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Shane, is there anything you'd like to add or anything I forgot before we wrap up today?
No, I think we covered Imitation pretty well.
Well, thank you for recording with me today. I agree with you, by the way. And then thank you all for listening. This is Abraham. We're out.
We're out.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.